How you doing, folks? You're watching Live with Onrie, and I'm your host, Onrie Compen. This evening's very special guest is a very talented and very smart individual. He has taken it upon himself to take his experiences as an attorney who works with comics and licensing IPs, and has decided to take his knowledge, sit down, and write a book about how to start your own independent comic book publishing business and how to run it. And it is a sincere pleasure to have him here, because I honestly wish I would have come across a book like this when I was first getting my start. And we were just talking about that backstage. So we're going to talk to him right now. And I can tell you, even though I've been working in this business for a decade now, there's still so much for me to learn. If you guys have noticed from the guests that we've had in the show over the last few days, DeMatteis, Tim Seeley, Mike Deodato, all these guys, they are vetted in the industry. They have been doing stuff for a long time. And you can see that even they get rejected. Even they still don't always get what they want just because they're established names in the business. They're constantly trying to break into the business again and again and again with ideas. And they're always learning. They're always looking at what other people are doing. We're all in this together, and we're all trying to learn from each other in order to further ahead our ideas, further ahead our ambitions. And it's a very bold endeavor to take on such a task, to sit down and actually explain how the sausage is made. So everybody, please welcome Gamal Hennessy to Live with Onrie. How you doing, sir?
Doing pretty good, sir. How are you?
Oh, doing fantastic. Can you do us all a favor? Tell us all about a little more about who you are and what you do, and then we're going to take it from there.
Okay, perfect. Name is Gamal Hennessy. I am a comic book attorney and author. Started out in the business around 1999. Worked for a company called Central Park Media, doing anime and manga licensing. Was there for about 4 or 5 years, and then jumped over to Marvel, where I was the international publishing manager for about 2 years. And in that experience, I actually came across a lot of artists and writers and professionals in the business who didn't really have legal representation, someone to explain to them how contracts worked. So what I did when I left Marvel is I set up my own practice with the goal of just explaining to creators what it is that they were signing when they were signing contracts with a company like Marvel. But as the industry grew and as things started to change and technology made it easier for people to actually start publishing their own comics, my business expanded as well. So that I wasn't just negotiating deals between creators and publishers. I was helping independent publishers set up their own companies, helping artists make agreements between each other. And then I realized about 5 years ago that there was another gap in what my clients needed, because I was helping them with the legal side, but no one was actually there to walk them through the project management side or the marketing side, or the distribution side, or the advertising, sales, revenue creation. So what I did was I sat down and I put together a outline of the entire process, from the time you get your idea to the time that you have a business model that you can replicate over and over again with your comics, put it in a book that I called The Business of Independent Comic Book Publishing, just to make it easy to remember. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The book is actually on Kickstarter right now. There's about 12 days left in the campaign, and we are offering digital versions, print versions, and there's another tier where if you order the digital version, you get an hour-long consultation where you and I will actually walk through the different aspects of your publishing plan so you can get a better idea of how you want to go about achieving whatever goal you set in the industry.
Gamal, I think that is fantastic. And might I be the first to say that I backed your Kickstarter this morning, just as I was preparing for this episode. Very proud backer, and I can't wait to see how this book turns out. Now, I'm going to jump into questions about you personally. I want to go back to a young Gamal. Oh man, I'm so sorry. Feel free to mess up my name and smack me when you see me in public. I'm so sorry.
You are not the first person to mess it up, so I wouldn't worry about it.
No, you know, people mess up my name all the time, and it's such an easy name to mess up. People call me Onrie. It happens all the time, and I just let it go. But anyway, you're a young man, and you decide you have this love for comics. Where did this love for comics start from, and how did it bud into this career of dealing with things on the business side as opposed to the creative? And
well, okay,
yeah,
I started reading comics probably that's probably the vehicle that I used to learn how to read, probably when I was about 5 or 6. I think, and I can't confirm this because I do not own the comic, that the first comic I read was some kind of Neil Adams Batman versus Joker, because I remember being very afraid of like people with big smiles for some reason. And I read comics all throughout like childhood, teenage years, adult years, because that was the emergence of the direct market. So it was very easy to go from picking up random comics at the newsstand to, having a pull box at, multiple different comic shops and then buying comics, because you could do that back then because comics were not $3.99, $4.99. They were cheap. So you could have a lot of comics coming in all the time. And I was probably reading comics while I was in law school, because the way I got my first job was a colleague of mine who was in law school was offered a job at a anime and manga company called Central Park Media. She didn't want the job, but she said, I know someone who's graduating in my class who would definitely want this job. So she set me up in that company, and that's how I got the job. Most lawyers who get out of law school, you cannot go straight from law school into being general counsel at a company of any size, because you have to kind of work your way up to that. But this company only had like 45 people, and there was no other lawyer in the company. So by definition, I became general counsel, and it was great. And that company focused almost exclusively on licensing pre-existing work. So there was manga and anime that was in Japan and had already done well there. We signed deals to bring it over here, strip off the Japanese language, repackage it, and then sell it in the American market. And I did that for about 4 years. So that's how I backed into comics from the business side, because I can't draw, and I highly doubt that I could put together a comic book script. So this is like the only way I can get in. So here I am.
See, but if you think about it, contracts in themselves are scripts, and the terms and everything. What it sounds to me like, Gamal, is that there's a lot of creativity in what your job entails as an attorney and what you started out doing. And I was going to ask, while you were telling me your story, I was like, you go into law school. I can't imagine that was cheap, the education. No, and probably the idea as soon as you finish law school is, how am I going to pay back my loans faster? Mm-hmm. So you want to work for a firm that's going to, give you big cases where you're going to see a nice return on your investment and all that kind of stuff. Yet you were so emboldened that you wanted to take this job for. Was this a smaller company? Did they even have? So you were their entire legal.
Oh defense. Yeah. Well, I was their in-house counsel. The company had outside counsel to handle if we had a big case that needed to be handled. If I needed a more experienced lawyer to talk to about a certain issue, we had another firm on retainer. So I was kind of there for the day-to-day, negotiate this deal, file this trademark, deal with this employment agreement issue, just to make sure the wheels didn't fall off the train, basically.
It's not easy to find someone like you, because there are not a lot of people who really want to take the time to use their legal educations to apply themselves in this area. At least, certainly, probably not when you were getting into it, which I would have to assume was a while ago. So, yes. How has the platform changed since then? Now that we're seeing like all these like multi-million-dollar properties come out of comic book, deals and everything. has there become a much stronger legal representation in the industry as a whole?
Well, if you actually look at the history of comic books from the time that they started in 1939, and this was part of the research for the book, you always had this kind of cross-pollination between comic books and other media, or comic books and merchandise. You had comic book related radio shows back in the 40s and 50s. You had comic book related TV shows. You had they had membership clubs where kids would send in a nickel to kind of be part of the Superman club. And that was generating for those companies at the time at just as much money, if not more money, than the comic books themselves. So you always had this kind of multi-layered revenue stream, at least with the larger publishers. It's just what's happening now is the scale is so much higher, and the actual ability for publishers of various different sizes. It's not just the big two, but other companies. You got your Image, your Antarctic Press has just got their Warrior Nun got renewed for a second season. So companies of a lot of different sizes are able to get into these multimedia markets in ways that they haven't been able to before. And I think in the next 5-10 years, it's only going to expand because the technology used to make content, whether it's video or video games or anything else, is going to decrease. And the people who are growing up now with independent books and small press books and manga, they're going to be in the same space 10, 15 years from now that the Russo brothers and Kevin Feige and, Ryan Coogler are now, that they were inspired by stuff that was back in the 70s and 80s. So the process will continue, and it will only diversify more, which is why I think the more comic book creators now understand the business of how the industry works, the easier it'll be for them to position themselves in a way that actually gives them a better chance of success.
You're speaking my language. You are absolutely speaking my language. And I think that's what many of us in the independent comics world strive for, is we know that our books, we know how our businesses work. We see money coming in. We know that this is a very lucrative field. And if you get out there and you're willing to work at it, you can see results. You can actually make this an actual career. Like if we look at Brian Pulido, for example, he's got a whole warehouse of people. I just saw a video he was doing right now. He was doing like a raffle. He was doing like a raffle for his Kickstarter. And, he was revealing ash cans, which, probably, let's just look at it from a business standpoint, probably didn't cost him very much to make. Doesn't mean that the value of it is not there, but it's looking for creative ways to monetize, and not just monetize, but turn your brand into something that is a collectible thing, which not only helps you bring money, and it allows you to grow your business and get to those points where I think you look attractive to, these bigger studios like Netflix and Amazon. But here's a question for you. And this one is personal. I'm asking you for your take on it. So, I've been working the convention ground for the last 10 years, and without any distribution from limited distribution from Diamond, I've managed to sell over 100,000 copies of my book just from going to conventions and selling out. But now I'm at this point where I'm like, okay, I've even had a couple licensing deals in Korea, and some other stuff that's like in the works, but just, kind of, how it is. And, now I'm trying to see, how do I get in the room with the studio to pitch, and so I've been talking to a couple publishers, and they really want to take a lot of the IP percentage from me. They want like 50% for being involved in the deal. And the thing is I don't need them in the deal. I just need to get in the room. So,
well, that's the thing. What you need is a key to get in the door.
Yes, that is it, Gamal. Yes.
But the people who have the key to get in the door know that that's the one thing that you need, and without the key, you cannot get in the door. So they're going to sell you the key. The key is 50%. Now, unless there's two things you could do if you don't want to do that deal. One, build yourself up so that you actually have the key, and that may take you It may take you 2 months. It may take you 2 decades, because the key, you can't really order the key on Amazon, basically. The other option that you have is to find someone who has a cheaper key.
That's what I'm looking for, is the cheaper key, because I think that one thing about this business is we like to look at it as, I want everything, right? I created this, I put the time in, I did everything, so therefore it's all mine. But I think that, we have to take care of each other. I got a co-writer on my series, and he's my partner on it. He helps me, work out everything. I can't just throw him off on to the side. But at the same time, we need somebody who can bridge that gap for us. And that's always something that is also hard to find, because there are a lot of people who kind of pop up and go. And I wanted to ask you about that. I find that the people that I have talked to, it's kind of like the show that I know on Netflix that my wife and I have been watching, called The Episodes, and it's about Hollywood and just how fickle it is. How 1 minute they'll love you and the next second they'll hang you out to dry. So and I see it from other people too. Like, I have talked to some creators who have just they were so excited about their comics being adapted to movie. They had really high-end producers involved, and then everything just falls to shit for some random reason. So how do you speak to that? To find the person with the cheaper key, I think there needs to be some sort of incentive for them. And I think that they also need to see that there's something there, right? Otherwise, they're probably not going to do anything.
Yeah, because a lot of people, if they're going to attach themselves to your project, because all of these are risks, they're gambles that are being taken. They want to stack the odds in their favor that something actually gets made, because it is very difficult, even if you have a good story, even if you have a way to actually get into the room to see the people that you need to see. There are a million different ways that a deal could fall apart, especially at that level. The more money is actually involved, the more ways that a deal can fail. So what it is that you have to bring to the table is not just a good story. You have to bring a story that actually that is viable, which means it already has a market. They already know that there's a certain number of people who have read this or have responded to this favorably. And that's leverage that you could use to actually get yourself into the door. Attaching a name to the project also gets you into the door, because it's one thing if you have a really good story. It is another thing if you have a really good story and Martin Scorsese, Leonardo DiCaprio are attached to the project, because now the door opens. Because what Hollywood is actually looking for is something beyond a good story. They're looking for a good story that's going to be a significant return on the investment. Hollywood executives are usually not dealing with small numbers, because it's not in their best interest to deal with small numbers. So they need a project that's on the table that's going to make more money as opposed to less. Because in Hollywood, like in most narrative art, most narrative entertainment, a lot more projects fail than succeed. Even the ones that get greenlit, even the ones that actually get made. So the ones that succeed have to cover the cost of all the ones that fail. And nobody, if you're a producer, if you're the executive, you don't want your name attached to a whole lot of stuff that's failed. Because then the people who actually pay your salary are going, well, why are we hiring you? You just keep bringing us deals that fail. So to sum up, you have to actually be able to stack the deck in order to give yourself a better chance for the deal to actually go through, with the knowledge that in a lot of cases, the deal's just not going to happen because the deal's not going to happen. It's a lot of deals fall through the cracks and never get made.
And this is all very true. And the way I like to look at it too, is that, and I want to bring this around to try and bring it to a little bit more of an optimistic ground. Just because it's not in movies doesn't mean it's not in other areas too. And you focus on IP licensing. So, I would assume a movie, okay, that's like a multi-million-dollar budget, but a toy line, a toy line, it could be a little bit more. Is it in your experience? What's the difference between these different forms of IP licensing, and which ones are easier to navigate? I would assume it depends on the property itself.
Yes.
Probably something that is more kid friendly is more is more like inviting to like a toy company than say maybe Netflix. Maybe the toy line would work first. What's your take on all this?
In my experience, having worked with certain lines when I was at Marvel, we did a lot of toy related stuff. And a lot of times the way a child gravitates toward a toy, or the way a parent or someone who's buying the toy for the children gravitate toward the toy, is that they see the toy on television. So they see the cartoon, they see the YouTube, whatever, and then they want the toy. If the toy exists independent of any sort of media that they've been pre-exposed to, the children most of the time are not interested in those toys. And I think that is even more prevalent now than it was when I was back at Marvel. So if you're going to do, like, the easiest thing to get involved in, if you're an independent creator and you're building up, like if you want to build up merchandise, if that's the route you want to go for your secondary income, it's probably apparel. T-shirts, hats, things like that, because the barrier to entry is lower. The actual upfront cost is lower. It's something that you can, from a distribution, production, and marketing aspect, it's something that you can manage without bringing someone in from the outside and without a lot of upfront money. So it's something that can be, the margins will be lower, but you actually get to keep more of those margins as the money comes in. And every person who buys the shirt, who's probably going to be buying the shirt because they're a fan of the book, that becomes a certain level of pre-existing marketing and advertising for the book itself.
Yeah, you're good. You're basically, every time someone slaps your shirt on, it's a walking billboard for you, no matter where they are. Someone could be working out, and there's a reason why I never take this shirt off, Gamal. I never take it off. I never wash it, and it's been great for keeping social distance. Let me tell you.
Good point.
All right. Well, let's stay on this topic of licensing for a minute. What are some other kind of like interesting avenues that you've seen comic book producers, independent comic book producers go when it comes to IP licensing, aside from maybe translations of their books overseas, maybe some other kind of like cool thing like fidget spinners with their logos on it. I don't know, but something along those lines.
I have actually seen a couple of comic book creators attempts to get into the interactive market on a smaller scale, with usually you trying to do like licensing for mobile apps. So someone who might be an independent game producer is looking for an IP to make. They want to build a game. But they need a story. But they're a game developer. They're not like a writer. So they could either A, go out and hire a writer to make a story about something, or B, they can get a license to a pre-existing story that already has a fan base and build it on that. So a couple times I've been involved in deals. It's like, well, the game may start out on the iTunes store or on Steam, but they're moving major numbers. Even if it's free to play and they're trying to use microtransactions, there still can be some cash there over and above what you actually get for the comic.
Very interesting. And it's we're going to get to the comics in a second, because I think that's the root of everything. But you had mentioned that you were eventually working at Marvel. So how did that happen? How did you jump from this manga company over to Marvel, and what was different about your position at Marvel?
Well, at a certain point, I think this was right around the time of the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. Marvel decided that they wanted to expand their international publishing program. They had international publishing in Europe, South America, North Africa, and different parts of Asia, but they didn't have a presence in Japan. And they realized that most of the other markets they were in, they could actually go into those markets with just the name Marvel, Spider-Man, Wolverine, Hulk, and actually get someone to offer them a good deal right up front. The Japanese market was different because the Japanese negotiating process is much more layered and much more involved. You can't just pick up the phone and talk to somebody and get a deal.
Yes. It is a very different process over there. There's a lot of levels.
And because they have such a rich and diverse manga culture embedded in the society, they did not need, nor on a certain level did they think they even wanted, Marvel books in, the manga market. So because I had been negotiating with Japanese publishers for 4 years, they said, okay, we need you to come and head up our international publishing division. And my overall job was handle the worldwide translations for Marvel books. So not just Japan, but around the world. But opening up Japan was my major focus. In addition to that, because everyone knew that was going to take time, I had to work on some of the merchandise deals that were involved with the movie properties. I had to work on some of the talent agreements that were involved in bringing in freelancers to make a lot of the books, because that was when the Ultimates line was starting to expand. The Marvel Knights line was in full swing. So we had to bring in a lot of people there. So that was the need of Marvel to get into the Japanese market, was the reason that they brought me over from Central Park Media.
That is fantastic. So, okay, here's a question for you then. And this is just curious. I'm just curious to know, what was your work environment like? Did you actually go in and work in an office? Were you wearing a suit and tie every day? Okay.
Yes, because, I was wearing a shirt and tie every day, not because that was mandatory at Marvel. In fact, they didn't ask for that at all. They actually asked for the opposite. But that was just my personality. So, but yes, you did work in an office. You did have to go to meetings. You did have to do a lot of the business kind of stuff that a lot of other businesses do. Production schedules, finance schedules, marketing meetings. The only difference was there were like toys and, Captain America's shield hanging on the wall. And there was like, everyone had a wall full of like graphic novels all the time. And it was fantastic. It was still a business. It was still a company.
And another thing I want to speak to about that, given that I've had experience working with Asian companies, they expect a certain demeanor when you're presenting to them. So the fact that you're wearing a suit and tie, probably helped bridge the deals, because like you were saying, they didn't even want Marvel stuff in their market. So that, knowing in advance to have the proper demeanor for this is important. You got to know how to dress for the job. I'm not, I don't think everybody needs to have a stick up their butt about wearing a suit every day, but it's important to know when to wear that suit, and when you're wearing that suit, what you're trying to achieve in said meeting and everything.
Absolutely.
We're going to take a nosedive in a second and get back down to comics, because I think we're thinking outside with all these IPs and everything, and I want to get down to the nitty gritty. But I want to speak to one thing that one of our viewers has been mentioning, Alton Simpson. If you haven't checked out his book, folks, I highly recommend it. It is Vampires in Brooklyn, New Jersey. God, I'm messing everything up today, dude. I'm sorry. Vampires of New Jersey. He has shared his work with me. I am so looking forward to reading it. I was a part of his Kickstarter. Awesome, dude. So, like me, Alton, he has his own comic book property. It is beautiful stuff. He's got properties, I should say. Mm-hmm. And he is also taken on the role of making film adaptations himself of various, screenplays he writes. And, he was just mentioning in the comments that he would shoot an IP himself, but not until he can make it look like a Hollywood production. So right. There is a third option too, right? Besides, making your own key or buying it for less. I guess a fourth option would be to do it yourself. But of course, doing it yourself requires a hell of a lot of, it requires a huge not an advance, but a huge budget in acquiring the budget. Have you seen other independent creators ever take a bold move as to say, I'm going to finance a movie myself and I'm going to get investors involved and go that route?
What I have seen is I've seen people who are professionals in the film industry who already have that kind of framework of, they know producers, they know they can get a camera crew together very quickly, they can do things like that, then decide they want to actually make a comic. And then, it's kind of the idea was kind of a boomerang effect. They were going to make a comic to develop an intellectual property, and then take the intellectual property that they had and then spin that into the network that they had to make the movie that they wanted to make. So it wasn't necessarily the comic creator, the pure comic creator trying to make a film. It was the film professional wanting to make a comic to then make a bigger film, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. So it's like setting it up, kind of what Alton just said.
Mm-hmm.
People film. Here, I'll just show it.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first time I'm doing this, Gamal. I'm learning all this stuff as I go. I had no idea what I was doing when I first started the show. People shoot trailers and use them to sell to the majors. Absolutely. I mean, I was asked to put together feelers and all kinds of stuff in order to try and pitch you some shit. And the more stuff you have in advance, the better it is when you're getting into licensing. But now let's go back. When I say take a nosedive, I'm saying let's get back to the basics, because before we can even think about licensing and before we can even see that end goal, we have to start at the bottom. And what this book you're putting out, what you're publishing is about starting your own independent comic. And that's going through all of the printing, I would imagine, and marketing. I mean, tell me, what does your book cover? How are you presenting it? What does this beast look like?
Okay, well, the business of independent comic book publishing is a guide for the entire process of publishing a comic and getting it out into the world. So we start from the inspiration that you have to say, I want to make comics. And we walk you through the entire process of how you go about turning that idea into a finished comic and getting that comic out into the world in a way that makes business and legal sense, so that at the end of the process, you have a business model that is specific for your circumstances and the story you want to tell, that you can then replicate for any other comic and build up your publishing program. So that we walk you through all three of the major stages of publishing a comic. So that's pre-production, where you gather the resources and you make the major decisions that are going to impact how the book is going to be published. Production, where you actually make the art, you create the finished pages, you decide how it's going to be distributed and all the rest of it. And then post-production, where you actually get the book out into the world in a way that actually generates revenue. So you go pre-production, production, post-production, and then that process can actually start over again when you're ready to make the next book. But by then, you'll actually know all the integral steps involved, whether that's IP development, talent management, marketing, distribution, advertising, sales, revenue models, and all the rest of it.
So who would you say are the kind of people who obviously this is made for someone who wants to get into independent comics publishing, but I've spoken with a number of different guests over the last few months, and we all come from very different backgrounds. Some of us have a little money to start. Some of us don't have any money at all. And some of us have just a little bit of money to get that first issue out. How much of a factor is crowdfunding in your book? Like, do you talk about it much at all?
We have, we have a whole chapter on crowdfunding and how crowdfunding works as a revenue model. But you have to, as long as you keep in mind that there's a difference between investment in a comic and the revenue from a comic, because the investment to get to the point where you're ready to launch a Kickstarter, there's going to be a substantial amount of work that has to be done, and that work, one way or another, has to be paid for. So you have to, what I like to say is investment is the money that goes into an idea. Revenue is the money that comes out from the idea. If you only have the idea and there's no investment, you're not going to get very much revenue. So you have to figure out where the initial money is going to come from. For some people, that's their own money. For some people, that's other people's money. And you have to try to figure out, well, if you're wherever the money is going to come from, how is that going to impact the way your book is produced? And how is that going to impact your life outside of the comic? Because like you said, if people have different circumstances and there are different things that they need to pay for with their money. They don't just have comic book money, they have money for a lot of stuff. So when they're building up this business model and this business plan, they have to figure out, well, A, where's the money going to come from? And B, what happens if the money does not come back? Because not every comic book generates a profit. In fact, most comic books, especially when they first come out, do not make a profit, especially the business models that people are using now. And some comics just break even. If you're using money that you cannot necessarily afford to lose, then that money probably shouldn't be used to make a comic book. What I advocate in my book is you should only be using the money that you can afford to lose, like if you were investing in the stock market, because your book is an investment. You're investing in your idea, hoping the idea gets bigger. But like any investment, you could lose the entire investment. So I strongly urge people to, as I'm going through the different types of investment models, be cognizant of the fact that this money is money that could be lost, and don't spend money that you can't lose.
I can't endorse what you said more than I can with my words right now. I agree with that completely, because this is, a lot of people see it differently. They look at it as, hey, I get to be my own boss. Hey, I have all access to all this money. And then you lose that money because you make some kind of, not smart moves, and all of a sudden you find yourself in debt for no reason. And especially with Kickstarter, that can happen very easily if you don't work out the math of how much it's actually going to cost to ship stuff, how much it's actually going to cost to produce some of the things that you're rewarding people as an incentive. But let's talk about Kickstarter some more, because you're no dummy when it comes to crowdfunding. I mean, when you look at somebody who can go so far beyond their goal that they've made 10 times what they initially asked for, that is a huge thing. So you asked initially for $3,000. Right now you're at $13,000. That's amazing. And I'll be honest with you, I've never gotten that kind of success on Kickstarter as of yet. What would you say, is your kind of like, what was your take going into this? Like, why turn to crowdfunding with this when you probably could have found a comics publisher who would have just, snaked this up from you?
Well, the original idea was not to do a Kickstarter. The original idea, when I was writing the book, I had scheduled it to be done and ready to go to print and be published in time for New York Comic Con 2020. But I was writing like the last 2 or 3 chapters of the book in March when the pandemic hit. And it quickly became apparent that there wasn't going to be a New York Comic Con. So my options were to either A, wait till 2021, or B, find some other way to get the book into the hands of people that wanted it. So I got together with a team of people, and we came to the conclusion that crowdfunding was the best way to go about it, because the groundwork was already in place. I had started marketing this book and discussing this book in social media and in other forms of marketing for about 1.5 years. So I had a substantial following long before I decided I was going to do a Kickstarter, which I believe was one of the keys to the success of the book. The other thing was I attached names to this project that were friends of mine and people that I had worked with before, but had a huge amount of credibility within the industry. So when I said, okay, this person wrote the foreword for the book, that instantly raised the pedigree of the book and made people more interested in backing it.
Absolutely. And And I just want to mention who wrote the forward to your book, because it's not somebody who's, it's a somebody. Joe Illich, who works as an editor. He's at Heavy Metal now, if I'm not mistaken.
He's executive editor at Heavy Metal.
Executive editor at Heavy Metal. He's worked for every company. He's done everything, and he is somebody that you want writing the forward to your book. So that is a huge accomplishment.
Exactly. And even before that, when I was trying to decide who was just going to be the editor for the book, I reached out to Mike Martz, because Mike Martz has worked for DC. He's worked for Marvel. He went back to DC, and then he started Aftershock, which has become a significant player in the comic book market in a very short period of time. So they were actually, instrumental in getting the word out about the book. A lot of people that I knew in the industry, just not even working on the project itself, but just letting their networks know about the book, raised the profile significantly. And one of the things that I say in the book is that if you're doing something independently, that doesn't mean you're doing it by yourself. And it also doesn't mean that if you're at certain stages, it's better to bring in someone who actually knows that business than to try to do all that work yourself and learn by failing. So I brought in people to do design for the cover. I brought in people to do marketing, to work with the comic book press to get access to like a Bleeding Cool or a Newsarama or something like that. And that also, when you look at the dashboard of the Kickstarter, you could see where all of these people are coming from to like donate or to back the project. They're coming from a lot of different sources that I would not have had access to if I just put out the book myself. So you bring in a team, and it's not necessarily going to be cheap, but it's going to be the money that comes out, the revenue is a lot more than the investment that I put in, which is the exact model that I was talking about before. So you said it, the way this Kickstarter, I believe, succeeded is because A, we had a crowd, B, we actually leveraged the specializations of a pre-existing team. And I think one of the other reasons why this book did well is because there's not a lot of other books in the space. There are a lot of books in the market about the creative side of making comics. There have been great books in that space for like 20, 30 years. There's even a few books about the legal aspects of the comic book industry and court cases about comics and very specific aspects of it, but there's not a book that walks you through the entire process of independent comics. This isn't
and I also want to say one more thing, and I know I'm so sorry to cut you off. Another aspect to this that this book offers that none of them do is your unique perspective, because you've worked in this industry, you've worked for the majors, you know this from all angles. Clearly, the success of your Kickstarter speaks for your knowledge base. And you also have friends that are now running their own independent publishing companies. So that is also a factor. Whereas some of these other books that are out there, not to say that the people who wrote them were not people who didn't know what they were doing, but probably didn't. I think the game has changed since. It seems like you're taking this in a very progressive direction and a very contemporary one too, because the industry platform has changed. That, independent publishing has never been more prominent than it is now. But please continue, and I totally broke you off your train of thought.
It's easy to pick up, because what I was going to say is this book is specifically for people who want to have an understanding of the entire process of publishing comics, but it does not focus on the specific perspective of the freelance comic book creator, because they have a different business model and a different financial incentive in the actual way the industry works. And it also doesn't focus on creator-driven comics like you'll get when you sign with a Simon & Schuster or sign with an Image, because that too is a very different business model that requires different decisions. But you can actually go into freelance creation and you can go into creator-owned creation after you understand the foundation. That's why I wrote this book first. There's going to be other books later, but this book is the foundation so that you can understand all the different aspects from the business, financial, and legal side. And then if you want to spin off and do other things, you could use that foundation to kind of angle yourself where you want to go.
Interesting. Now, in terms of actual production for your book, how long have you been working on this? How are you presenting it too? Because, there's Scott McCloud's book on understanding comics where he explains the comic book industry in actual comic book form. Mm-hmm. But, there's also, I think with your book, it's going to require you to put on different hats because, you may not be able to explain marketing in comic book panels or
and I can't draw like Scott McCloud, so there are no comic book panels in this book. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I don't have that skill. But the way I actually broke it down is in a question and answer format, because as a lawyer, a lot of times what happens is I get asked questions. Well, how do I do this? What is this for? How does this work? So I use that same model when I was building the book. Every book starts out with a major section, and then each section has a question that needs to be answered. So for instance, the first section is the foundation, and the fundamental question is, why are you making comics? Because if you are a creative person who wants to make narrative art in the 21st century, there are a lot of different avenues that you can use. Comics is just one. So if you've decided that you want to make comics, the question is why? And why did you not choose the other avenues? And what is your actual definition of what success in comics looks like? Because someone like Raina Telgemeier and someone like Stan Lee and someone like Alex Ross have all been very successful in comics, but they've all been very successful in very different ways. So how exactly are you going to define your success, and how long do you want to actually be in this kind of environment? So every question has its own chapter, and every chapter has sub questions that actually lead to concepts, because with independent publishing, it's not like a one size fits all kind of reality. Every creator has a different set of resources, a different set of circumstances, and a different story they want to tell. So it wouldn't make sense to try to tell everyone who wants to make independent comics to do it one way. So what I do is at every major stage, I explain what the decision is that has to be made. I explain what the options are with each decision, and I explain the positives and negatives with each decision that has to be made and how it relates to the overall process. So that when you're reading the book, you can decide, well, this is something that is important. This is something that is not as important, but I didn't think of it, so I'm going to use this aspect of it. And this part I'm going to skip because I'm not doing that. So at the end of the book, like I said before, you have a specific business model that is tailored for you, your circumstances, and your book.
That's really fantastic. I think that's a really great way to present it too, because the way our minds work as comic book readers, we need to see illustrations and text to move along. So I think it's great that you have a question and answer approach to the structure to this. And what I really like too is you can really approach this as this is really kind of like a thesaurus in a lot of ways for anybody at any level of the business. So even for me, it's a great tool because I want to be able to get your take on something. And, now I can, think about, I have a new comic project. I'll just give you an example. I have a new comic book project in the works right now. I have money to play with, investment money, right? So I'm starting another comic because once conventions start rolling, it would be fantastic to have a new project out there and something new to bring out into the world. So I enjoy self-publishing, and I'm always looking to revamp my game because I've been doing certain things a certain way for the last 10 years. And I think what good has come out of this pandemic is the fact that it has forced me to kind of like rein in a little bit and not focus so much on just going out and selling books for a moment, but to really look at what other people are doing and learn from them, learn from their strategies, and learn how they're succeeding. If they fail, why they're failing. Because I also look at it as when we fail, it's not that it's over. we failed, but we learned something from it. And if we decide to get back up and we decide to keep going, well, then we're still in the game. You know, I really like the analogy you said about the investment of money earlier in the show, because this is, you know, when you get into comics, you really do have to think about where the money is going, and you need it for more than just your art and more than just your printing. You need it for various other things, shipping, you know, you need it for, you know, merchandising, you need it for, you know, just showcasing, you need it for all kinds of things. So it's great to have a resource that can explain what to do, because we also forget too, right? When we're in the groove of things, we kind of forget, oh yeah, you know, you handle, don't forget to post on all these social media platforms or something like that. You know, we kind of forget those kinds of things. So again, I'm not sure if we really answered the question, but so how long did it actually take you to write the book?
The actual concept came to me in 2015. I started the research in 2016, and I started actually writing the book, I want to say, in 2018. So the actual writing of the book probably took a year and a half, but the research, because I had a certain amount of experience and my editor had a certain amount of experience, but I also wanted to pull in ideas from other creators who've actually gone through it and had their own process. I wanted to actually go into the comic book press, because there's a lot of business related articles that have been written and analyzed, and situations have been dissected over the past 10, 15 years. That all went into the book. And then there's a lot of just small business and general business concepts that aren't necessarily taught to comic book creators in the general business media, the general business literature, that I brought into the book, so that people can get a foundation of exactly what a P&L statement is and what it looks like and why you need it, how to actually, what an invoice is for, how you create one, why you need it, how to do project management, especially if you're using remote teams, because even before the pandemic, there were a lot of independent comic creators who were using geographically dispersed groups of people to make their book. But managing those people and managing their time and managing their deliverables requires a certain knowledge and a certain set of skills that aren't actually taught. So I try to go through each one of those things. And going back to the question and answer thing, you can just look once you have a question, like, okay, how do I decide if I'm going to get a table at a convention? Well, you go to the chapter on conventions, and in one of the sub questions in that chapter is, should I get a table or not? And then I break down, well, this is the benefits of going to a convention and not having a table. This is the benefits of going to the convention and having a table. And these are the circumstances where you might want to choose one or the other. And then I break down, well, how much does it actually cost to go to a convention either way? Not just the printing and the shipping, but like paying for the table, paying to get there, paying to, you know, eat and bar con and everything else. And then give you a financial model to figure out, well, okay, how many books do I have to sell to justify the cost of going to that specific convention? Where do I break even? And where do I make a profit? Because that's going to tell you how many books to print, how many books to ship. So, you know, if you sell through the whole thing, okay, well, now we've actually covered the cost of this convention and then some. And so it goes through all of those different things. And it took about 4.5 years.
I'm so glad you said that, because I feel like it's taking me forever to write my new book. So it's very reassuring to me to hear that not everybody could just poop out their concepts, that it actually takes time to gather your thoughts and to put everything together. There is one last question that I have for you, and it's your vision for this book. So your Kickstarter is going to end in 13 days. Yes. I assume that this is not the last we're going to hear of this book. You were planning on bringing it to New York Comic Con. I assume that when New York Comic Con is held again in person, that we will see you, pushing this book. But what other means are you hoping to distribute? What are your plans for this now that you finish your Kickstarter?
Well, once the Kickstarter was over, my plan was to actually have the book available for retail sale in the major book channels online and offline. However, the success of the Kickstarter has actually attracted the attention of literary agents who have contacted me and said, what you probably need to do is to get this book into bookstores and universities, because there's a lot of courses where people are actually learning the creative aspects of making comics. This book would be a perfect addition to those curriculum where you could actually, people can get out of whatever program that they're in, know, learning what's in the book and, you know, learning the actual art and craft of making comics. So going to sign with an agent, which means it's going to probably, the next version of the book is probably going to be coming out from hopefully some kind of major publisher, and then that version of the book will come out. But like I said, this is just the foundation of what I'm trying to do, because the next book that I'm going to start working on is the business of freelance comic book publishing. So I can actually help people who don't necessarily want to run a business, a comic book publishing business day to day, but want to do work in comics from an artistic standpoint. How do they build their business? How do they make their business models? And then the book after that will be about creator owned, and then the book after that, and the book after that. So
that's fantastic. So this is a bold endeavor. This is a series of books. This is your magnum opus, and it is a huge, tremendous contribution to the comic book world, because I bringing this all back to what you said from the very beginning. Independent comics in the next 10 to 15 years is going to be the mainstream thing. It's going to be the, you know, all these creators who are putting out their books. And, you know, let me tell you, Gamal, throughout this whole pandemic, another thing I've been doing aside from just talking to people is reading a lot of comics, particularly from my contemporaries. And what is being done in independent comics right now is just totally off the grid. I mean, it's off the charts. I don't know. I'm using all the wrong wrong references tonight. I'm sorry, but you know, publishers like Scout, Source Point Press, Vault Comics, you know, all these micro publishers, they're doing really, really great stuff, and even more so, the guys who are, you know, self-published like me are also doing great. Again, Alton Simpson, I consider him, you know, up there, you know, and just I can't. There's too many names to think of right now, and we've seen him on the show and all kinds of stuff. But I want to take a moment to thank you for coming on the show, because I feel like you've given me a lot of perspective, and always reminding me that I still have so much to learn about this business. And thank you for sharing everything with us. And I wish you the very best of luck with your Kickstarter.
Well, thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it. I appreciate the support. And thank you for backing the book.
Absolutely. Do us one last thing before we head off. I want you to take the stage again. Tell us the best place we can find you, the best place we can reach out to you and throw money in your direction.
Oh, well, the best place for the next 12 days to reach out is going to be on the Kickstarter. You can go onto Kickstarter and type in Gamal Hennessy, or you can type in the business of independent comic book publishing, and you will find the Kickstarter. Beyond that, if you need any kind of legal support or a free consultation for your comic book project, you can find me at creativecontractconsulting.com. That's all one word. Or you could just go into Google and type in Gamal Hennessy, and my name will pop up. And you will find me, because there are not that many Gamal Hennessys out there. You can also do the same thing in social media. Most of the time, I'm on Facebook and Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn, but not that much. But if you type in Gamal Hennessy, I'm the only person that's going to pop up. No one's else is going to pop up. You'll find me there.
Excellent. Gamal, thank you so much. Do me a favor. If you have a couple minutes, I would love to talk to you backstage. Let me just close out the show. Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. All right, guys, what a great episode. Wrapping up a fantastic week of Live with Onrie. Next week, we'll come back with brand new guests, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with them. They are also independent publishers like me, and they have a lot of wisdom to impart with us all. So I will see you guys next week. Stay safe out there. Be kind to each other. You know, there's no reason to, you know, get all worked up. Let's all kind of be civil about things, and I will see you next week. And until that time comes, onward to victory.